Historic Australia. In this episode of Criminals, Cutthroats and Convicts, we look at the most interesting and unusual case of William Buckley, the disappearing man. William Buckley was born in approximately 1776 to 1780, depending on where you find the information. He was born in England. There are different sources that say he was born in Marton, Cheshire, and another has given Maxfield as his place of birth, as per the book The Life and Adventures of William Buckley. They say he was born to Eliza Buckley and had 2 sisters and 1 brother. It looks as though his childhood was quite unconventional, as at around the age of 6 it says that he was being raised by his mother's father in Macclesfield. In his early life, he was an apprentice to a bricklayer named Mr. Robert Wyatt. However, he leaves this profession to join the Kings Foot Regiment and then transfers to the King's Own Regiment. It was similar to an army, as he fought in 1799 in the Netherlands against Napoleon. This was around the time of the revolutions. In this war, he suffers an injury to his hand and returns back to London. As we know, in today's army, once you sustain a fair injury, they do send you home. Back in England, he is convicted of knowingly receiving a bolt of stolen cloth. He claims he was carrying it for a woman and didn't know it was stolen. As with most of our convicts in our previous episodes, at the Old Bailey they don't believe them. And in William's case, he was transported to New South Wales for 14 years, which was quite excessive. 14 years was usually for someone who did something quite large, like highway robbery or something like that. So this bolt of cloth, whatever that was, obviously was worth quite a lot of money. From many people's accounts of dealing with William Buckley, they did say that he was roughly around the height of 6 foot 5 inches, which was quite tall for a man at this time. It's been said that his looks were not in his favour and had bushy hair a lot of the time, a short snub nose and a face marked by smallpox. William Buckley left England in the April of 1803 aboard the HMS Calcutta. It was one of 2 ships sent to Port Phillip to form a new settlement under Lieutenant Colonel David Collins. When they arrived in the October of 1803, they anchored on the southeastern side of the bay, which is near modern-day Sorrento. The new settlement was called Sullivan Bay. This quickly ran into problems due to its lack of fresh water and poor soil. A decision was made some weeks later to abandon this site. Buckley got word that they were going to be moving to Van Diemen's Land, and at 9 p.m. on the 27th of December in 1803, Buckley and 3 other convicts absconded into the bush. 1 man was shot and severely injured on the escape, but the others made their way around to Port Phillip Bay. They split up in the area of present-day Melbourne. Buckley's companions went northeast hoping to get to Sydney, which they thought was not far away, although we know it's quite a long way, especially around the coast. William Buckley was very tired and very dehydrated as he walked along the bay area. Following his escape from the settlement, he avoided contact with the First People. He'd never seen them before and probably heard all kinds of stories on his journey to Australia. Travelling around Port Phillip Bay as far as the Bellarine Peninsula. Buckley says his first meeting with a small family of the first people gave him immense help and shared food with him. He also began to learn their language before leaving their company. It is said that he travelled much further to Paincallet Creek at the Aries Inlet and Mount Defiance, living alone and off the land. We do know that at some point after this, he meets up with the Wtherong people, initially meeting up with some women of the group. This was several months after his escape. Whilst he was making his hike north, he had taken a spear used to mark a grave for use as a walking stick to help him through the rugged terrain. The women of the Wtherong recognised the spear as belonging to a relative who had recently passed away. They invited him back to their camp and truly believed he had returned from the spirit realm as Murrungurk, the elder who had passed and whose spear he was carrying around. The Wtherong people joyfully welcomed him and adopted him into their group. Fascinatingly, for the next 32 years, he lived with the Wtherong people on the Bellarine Peninsula. He was treated with great affection and respect. They have said because of his age and his peaceful demeanour, he became a Gurungaita, a person of considerable respect among the people, and his voice was influential in deciding matters of war and peace. He also became a weapon expert amongst the first people. Despite this, he was banned from participating in their wars. It is also to be understood that he had 2 wives from the Wtherong people, and that he had a daughter with one of them. Despite taking 2 wives, it is understood that he gave one of them up as it was causing unrest amongst the men of the Wtherong people. He preferred to stay alive and return to the simple way of life. He has noted down that he had witnessed wars, raids and blood feuds. We're not entirely sure, but at some point William Buckley hears of a ship at the Indented Head. John Batman had been sent from Van Diemen's Land back to Port Phillip in order to form a treaty with the First People, so as that they could acquire 6,000 acres of land for the settlement of Port Phillip, today's Melbourne. John Batman had put up a campsite at Port Phillip, and this roused suspicion from the First People in the area. This word got back to William Buckley, and he had to investigate. I suppose he might have been quite curious, as it had been 30 years since he'd had any contact with the European settlement. He decided to go along with some of the Wtherong people to the campsite. It is understood that he appeared wearing kangaroo skins and carrying Aboriginal weapons into the camp. 3 European men were sitting at the campsite: a William Todd, James Gum and Alexander Thompson. There were also 5 of the First People from the Sydney area who had been left behind to maintain the base while John Batman had returned to Launceston. William Todd recounts the moment that William Buckley turned up at the camp. It was a journal entry for the 6th of July 1835. It was a journal entry for the 6th of July 1835. About 2 o'clock, a white man came walking up to the native huts, a most surprising height. Clad the same as the natives, he seemed highly pleased to see us. We brought him a piece of bread, which he ate very heartily and told us immediately what it was. He also informs us that he has been above 20 years in the country, during which time he has been with the natives. He then told us his name was William Buckley. Being so long with the natives, he has nearly forgotten the English language, but the native language he can speak fluently. The men fed him and treated him with kindness, and William showed them a tattoo on his arm with the initials WB. Fearful of being shot because he was a deserter, he told them that he was a soldier that was on a ship that was wrecked out at sea. And a few days later he revealed his identity, to the amazement of all of them. In September of the same year, he was granted a pardon by Lieutenant Governor Arthur in Van Diemen's Land. In 1836, William Buckley was given the position of interpreter to the First People, and as a guide for Captain Foster Fiennes. Among others, his knowledge of the Aboriginal language was put to good use. William, accompanied by Joseph Gellibrand on the 4th of February, went on a trip west of Melbourne, heading toward Geelong, where they met a group of First People with whom Buckley had lived. Joseph Gellibrand noted in his diary, "On the 5th of February 1836, I directed Buckley to advance, and we would follow him at a distance of 1/4 of a mile. Buckley made toward a native well, and after he had rowed about 8 miles, we heard a cooey, and when we arrived at the spot, I witnessed one of the most pleasing and affecting sights. There were 3 men, 5 women, and about 12 children. Buckley had dismounted, and they were all clinging around him, and tears of joy and delight running down their cheeks. It was truly an affecting sight, and proved the affection which these people entertained for Buckley. Among the number were a little old man and an old woman, one of his wives. Buckley told me this was his old friend with whom he had lived and associated 30 years. By late 1837, Buckley had been disenchanted with his new way of life and the people around him, and left for Van Diemen's Land. He remained there for the next 19 years until his death in 1856, taking a few jobs such as gatekeeper at a female factory, and for a short period as an assistant storekeeper at an immigrant's home at Hobart. On the 27th of June in 1840, he was married to a very short woman named Julia Higgins at St John's Church, Newtown, by the Reverend T.J. Ewing. Apparently, she was that short and he was quite tall that they had to use a handkerchief so as they could link arms. They tied 2 ends of a handkerchief together and she put her arm through the loop. She could not reach his arm to link. Quite cute and strange. It was speculated that Julia had been the widow of a Daniel Higgins who had killed one of the first people en route from Sydney to Port Phillip in 1839. They were free Irish immigrants that had come to Sydney. After the death of Daniel, Julia and her daughter Mary Ann met up with William Buckley. Mary Ann must have been quite young, as Buckley has claimed her as his own. William Buckley died in 1856 after falling out of the seat of his carriage being pulled by a horse. William Buckley experienced life-altering injuries when riding in his gig or carriage through Green Pond in Hobart. It is unknown what caused the fall. However, as a result, he was unconscious for some minutes. Upon regaining consciousness, he realised he could no longer move his limbs. He was admitted into St Mary's Hospital, where he was for just over a week before he discharged himself back to his wife and his home. Upon arriving home, he realised he couldn't find any comfort laying down. He had excruciating pain across his loins, and he still could not move his limbs. It is believed that this caused him great pain, and in the end, his death, some days later. After his death, Julia moved north to be with Mary Ann, her daughter, and William Jackson, her husband, and their family. Eventually, they all moved to Sydney, and it is noted that Julia died at the Hyde Park Asylum on the 18th of August 1863. William Buckley is buried in the St George Burial Ground at Battery Point, and a plaque commemorates him at Buckley's Rest, a small park in Sandy Bay, Hobart. John Morgan wrote a book, The Life and Adventures of William Buckley. It is said that when Buckley was 72 years old, he and John Morgan got together to write his story. Unfortunately, as William died a few years later, what was written in the book wasn't all believed. Many people have dismissed some of the accounts as being made up by John Morgan, as William isn't around to confirm them anymore. One of these way out stories is where William Buckley runs into a bunyip, which is actually mentioned in our bunyip story from the Legends of the Land. But the book is worth a read, as there seems to be a lot more about William Buckley that we don't know. Not everyone was disappointed with John Morgan's story about William Buckley. It is said that one of the early authors of Aboriginal studies claimed Morgan's book gave a truer account of Aboriginal life than any other work he had read. William Buckley is remembered for his assistance to the First People in those early days of the treaty. He has also been commemorated with plaques. He also has many other books and a movie written about him, as well as Buckley Falls Reserve, where a waterfall has been named after him near the Papermill River in Fainsford. William Buckley's tale was quite interesting to research. It really was an adventure. From the moment he arrived in Australia and left the colony, he was on his own, fending for himself. It must have been such an adventure, living among the bush, meeting people of another nationality, having to learn another language and eat food a whole new way. It must have been quite the adventure. It is sad when we read that he was crucial in forming the treaty between John Batman and the First People. However, I believe he was very upset about the way that things were handled, especially with his Wtherong tribe, as he did try everything he could, trying to reason with the European settlers for land that he'd lived on for 32 years. Houses have been erected in this time, and many nationalities live upon the land that the First People once inhabited. And that his adventure didn't end when he moved to Van Diemen's Land. The way he died was quite painful, and yet another trial he had to endure before he met his maker. But the story of William Buckley shows how important his role as interpreter to the First People was, and for us to learn about the ways of the First People. And hopefully it helped forming some kind of rights for the Wtherong people at the time. As disturbing as some parts of these stories are, they are the history of Australia, and we have to tell them, as gruesome and as unfair as they may be. We hope you enjoyed the episode on William Buckley, the disappearing man, re-emerging 32 years later, wearing kangaroo furs and the ability to speak and wield weapons of the First People. Many believe that the saying, "You've got Buckley's hope," or "Buckley's and none," that saying was directly from the little hope of survival that William Buckley had in the bush on his own. The saying therefore means that you've got little or no hope. He was quite an unusual and capable man. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes, the first unsolved murder of Australia, and Margaret Catchpole, the horse thief. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and tap on that notification bell so as that you're aware when we post new episodes.